That's true.
Kory was appointed the Undersheriff by Sheriff Smith in July of 2010. As Undersheriff, he is second in command at the Sheriff's Office and oversees the daily operations of the department. Undersheriff Kory began his law enforcement career with the Shasta County Sheriff's Office in 1990. During his tenure with Shasta County, Kory patrolled Lake Shasta and worked in the jail. He came to Butte County Sheriff's Office in 1993 as a deputy sheriff for Butte County. Honea held assignments in patrol, the designated area deputy program, and investigations. As a detective in the investigations unit, Honea investigated numerous homicides and other violent crimes. In 2000, Honea transferred to the district attorney's office as an investigator, where he continued to investigate homicides and cases of suspected child abuse. While at the district attorney's office, he promoted through the ranks to become the chief investigator in 2008. He held the position until he returned to the sheriff's office as the undersheriff. The undersheriff holds a Juris Doctorate from the William Howard Taft University School of Law and is a member of the State Bar of California. He also holds an Associate of Arts degree from Butte College. Undersheriff Honea has earned supervisory and management certificates from the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, POST, and is a graduate of the POST Executive Development course. Please welcome Undersheriff Kory.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate the introduction. I got to tell you, the sheriff is always a tough act to follow. I got to play the straight man, and he always tells the best stories, and people enjoy it. So I'm always hoping that I can live up to what he's been able to deliver. Tonight, there's a little double pressure here because Ben always puts on a good show. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be invited to speak to the Paradise Tea Party in the past, and I've seen that they always put a lot of effort into making their programs informative and entertaining, and I really appreciate that, and I'm hoping to live up to their expectations. You know, the sheriff underplayed his efforts, I think, a little bit in terms of dealing with last year's legislation that would have significantly limited some of your rights with regard to firearms in California. And there were many days when the sheriff was on the phone talking with legislators, he was on the phone talking with the governor's office, writing letters, and so he really did do a lot of work to ensure that there were no more restrictive laws passed and imposed upon you here in California. And I think he deserves a round of applause for that. Now, you've heard a little bit from Ben about the first lawyer you heard from. Ben told you a little bit about the law and their civil implications of using deadly force. And then you heard from our esteemed District Attorney Mike Ramsey about the criminal implications of using deadly force. Since they were so ready to out me as a lawyer, I'll try to distinguish myself a little bit. Mr. Ramsey brought books today for the presentation. I brought my gun. So, we were talking to Mr. Ramsey and I were talking to the chief of the Tea Party a couple of years ago, and someone asked me, you know, my advice on what kind of firearm they thought that I thought that they should get for self-defense, and I did the same thing. I showed them the gun I was wearing. I said, well, this is the gun that I carry when I'm not expecting trouble. If I'm expecting trouble, then I'm going to go with what the sheriff talked about, like shotgun or something like that. So tonight, I want to talk to you a little bit. You've been briefed upon the law, at least with regard to criminal law and the law of self-defense. And I think you can see in California, there's quite a bit of leeway with regard to the use of deadly force, especially when or specifically when you reasonably fear for your life. And that fear is an imminent fear. But I want to talk with you a little bit about the responsible possession and sensible use of firearms, because I think it's through these ideals that we can advance public safety and protect the right of self-defense. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the Second Amendment and the right of self-defense. Embodied in the core of the Second Amendment is the inalienable right of self-defense. That right predates the Constitution and was well established in common law. And while the common law of self-defense is the proximate source of the defensive rights protected by the Second Amendment, the natural law is the source of the inherent right of self-preservation, which is hardwired into our psyche. Firearms have been the quintessential means of effective self-defense since colonial times. In terms of one's ability to defend himself or herself, firearms are the great equalizer. And the framers of our Constitution keenly understood this and sought to protect the right to possess and lawfully use firearms when they drafted the Second Amendment. The wisdom of the framers is illustrated by studies which show that firearms are overwhelmingly possessed and used for lawful purposes. Research by criminologists Gary Click and Mark Gretz reveals that Americans use firearms in self-defense as often as 2.5 million times per year, which is 3 to 5 times more often than firearms are misused by criminals. And their findings were published in a scholarly study. It was entitled Armed Resistance to Crime, the Prevalence and Nature of Self-Defense with Guns. And that study confirmed similar findings conducted in 13 other studies. Furthermore, the vast majority of those incidents where firearms were used in self-defense involved merely the display of the firearm to bring the situation into control. Now, inherent in the right of self-defense is the responsibility to act in accordance with the law, especially when the use of firearms is involved. But there's more to that responsibility than simply complying with the law. It is the duty of all defenders of the Second Amendment to practice, promote, and advance the ideals of responsible possession and sensible use of firearms. We all play a role in safeguarding our Second Amendment rights against infringement, and one of the best ways to fulfill that role is by practicing, promoting, and advancing the ideals of responsible possession and sensible use of firearms. So what do I mean by responsible possession? Well, generally stated, I mean it is the responsibility to always take steps to ensure that your firearms don't end up in the hands of someone who would use them to unlawfully or recklessly harm someone else. For example, criminals who would use firearms to perpetrate acts of violence. When I talk about this, I talk about our duty to make sure that we secure our firearms. The sheriff talked about his gun safe, and he's making preparations for a trip. If you've got a gun safe at home and you leave your guns unsecured, you're inviting trouble. It's unfortunate that we have to be worried about people breaking into our homes and stealing our guns, but the fact of the matter is it occurs. And if that happens and you've made that available, that gun ends up in the hands of somebody who will use it to harm somebody unlawfully. The other group of people that we need to be concerned about are people with mental illnesses who would cause harm to themselves or others. I would add to that category people whose judgment is impaired by alcohol, drugs, emotional instability, or immaturity. Now, I can't help but to wonder that if recent tragedies involving firearms could have been avoided altogether, if the owners of the firearms used in those incidences had practiced the ideals of responsible possession. Sandy Hook, the mother of that mentally ill young man responsible for that horrific tragedy, failed in her duty to keep that firearm out of his hands. Sparks, Nevada, here last week, it's been reported that that 12-year-old boy who took the gun to school got it from home. Why wasn't that gun properly secured? And just this morning, when I was preparing this presentation, I was watching the Today Show, and I learned that Washington State, a report of a 11-year-old boy who brought a gun and 400 rounds of ammunition to school. Why wasn't that gun secured? How did he get a hold of that gun? It's incumbent upon us, the defenders of the Second Amendment, to make sure that our firearms don't fall into the hands of people who misuse them. Now, I think it's also important to talk about the role that mental illness has played in gun violence. We have to address it. We have to talk about it and deal with it because it's a significant issue. Mental illness has been considered a cause in nearly 36 mass shootings in the U.S. since the massacre at Columbine High School in Colorado in 1999. and it is likely a factor in many of the 30,000 gun-related deaths that occur every year. Mental illness must be destigmatized in our society so that individual family members and friends, so that individuals, families, and friends are more willing to accept it and seek the treatment that they need. Early detection of mental illness is considered a key in helping prevent violent acts like Columbine, Virginia Tech, Tucson, Aurora, and Sandy Hook. Clearly, there's a fine line that needs to be walked between individual privacy rights and public safety concerns, but greater access to mental health treatment is essential. And I think it's incumbent upon those of us who strongly support the Second Amendment to advocate for that. We need to provide treatment for people who would do harm if they had firearms. Now, let me tell you what I mean when I talk about sensible use of firearms for self-defense. This requires, in addition to considering the legal implications of using a firearm, an evaluation of the necessity to employ lethal force in a given situation. Indeed, the decision to use lethal force may be one of the most significant decisions a person ever makes. There are circumstances where the legal justification to use lethal force is present, but other options and or tactical approaches might exist that would de-escalate the situation and bring it to a peaceful resolution. There have been times in my own experience where lethal force would have been legally justified. However, by using cover, distance, and de-escalating tactics, these situations were able to be resolved without shots being fired. And in those cases, I say that the sensible use of the firearm was employed and everyone came through unscathed. Now, the sensible use of firearms also involves training and adequately preparing for situations where the use of lethal force in a self-defense situation is the only option. If you're a gun owner and you have not prepared yourself to competently use your firearm in a life-threatening situation, you're not being responsible. It's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're prepared to deal with those situations when they arrive, and not only handle the situation in a legal manner, but also a competent manner. We all have a collective responsibility. We have a collective responsibility to guard against the infringement of the right of self-defense embodied in the Second Amendment. We do that by practicing and advancing the ideals of responsible possession and sensible firearm use. We do that by keeping firearms out of the hands of criminals and holding them accountable for their actions. We do that by keeping firearms out of the hands of mentally ill people who would use those firearms to harm themselves or others. And we provide treatment to those people. And we do that by demonstrating through responsible gun ownership that interfering with the rights of law-abiding citizens to defend themselves against evil does not enhance anybody's safety. Now, I want to thank all of you for your attention tonight. I hope my comments have had value. I certainly want to thank the Tea Party for inviting us tonight. It's always a great opportunity, and it's a pleasure to get out into the community and talk with people about important public safety issues. And for that, I thank you.
Folks, we've got some time for questions. Please make them questions, not hypotheticals. You heard the answer you're going to get if you come up with a hypothetical. And please, no speeches. Just ask a question and we'll see if we can get it answered.
I would like to know what this flag, don't tread on me, actually what it means and if it's in your yard.
Somebody want to give a better answer than I can. I'm not sure I can tell you precisely how it is. I believe it was the 13 colonies, and that was the separation of the snake. You can see that it's separated. I'm not sure that's a question we might ask our sheriff or our... Somebody else?
I don't have it.
Is the county a corporation? It could be.
I don't know if it's relevant to tonight, but her question was, is the county of Butte a corporation? Is that correct? Can anybody speak to that real quick?
No.
No.
It is not.
Thank you. It's not.
I have two questions. Well, actually, semi-hypothetical, but I think it's very real to me. Let's say someone comes to my home unarmed. Can I legally point my gun at him and say, get out of here, or raise your hands? Can I do that legally?
Yes.
The second question is this. Let's suppose someone comes to my home and wounds me pretty badly, and I can't use the gun. My wife grabs the gun and shoots the guy. Would you be arrested for using a gun that's on our own?
It depends.
Let's say we're both at home.
Do you want the civil law answer to that or the criminal law?
Okay, my question is, I heard nothing about robbery. We hear the intent to shoot someone if bodily injury. The only thing I heard mentioned was if a criminal jury, you had the word robbery in there, but most of the cases we may face is as the economy tanks, and I'll try not to teach a sermon or nothing, but somebody's coming in and they're taking something valuable of yours that you need. Stealing your car, or your goods, or your livelihood, your mechanic tools, or whatever. You have a gun on them, and they know you're not going to shoot, and so they just, what do you say? Hey, stop! Where does the use of a gun come in? You know, can I shoot that guy for taking my stuff?
No. The defense of property, remember when I was reading that instruction, you have to be in imminent fear of your life, not your car's life, or your mechanic tool life.
The question I have is, in the unfortunate circumstance where you had to use a gun to defend yourself, and you go through the process, and through the criminal trial, and they find you not guilty, you still now are facing a civil process. What percentage, or could you give a value about what are the chances of coming through the civil process with a finding in your favor?
It depends.
Thank you, Fred. This one's directed to the sheriff and Honey, is it? Honea, sorry. If our current administration, or any administration for that matter, passes law that violates the Second Amendment, such as to collect or confiscate guns, would you uphold the Constitution, or would you stand by the legislation that has been passed?
Would we come collect your guns? Is that what you're asking? No. There's two things that I have to do in terms of enforcing federal law. One of them is hold a illegal alien for a certain amount of time. There are people in the United States government that are in charge of taking your firearms, not your constitutionally elected sheriff. Now, I'd have to tell you though, if state gun legislation is passed, then I also have an oath to defend not only the Constitution of the United States, but the Constitution of the State of California. I don't get to pick and choose the state laws that I enforce, and I really shouldn't be picking and choosing the federal laws, but when it comes down to gun legislation, This sheriff, and I suspect the next one won't, come to your house and take your guns from you, unless there's due process. Due process means I have a search warrant, or you've been deemed to, perhaps you become a restricted person, and then I'm willing to come by the court to seize your weapons, then of course we'll do that. But there has to be a process, and it has to be due process. So, but should that occur, then certainly we're obligated to do that.
I've got one back here about CCWs.
Two-part question. One is, besides the obvious benefit, what are the other benefits of having one? And exactly what are the steps to get one? How often do you need to be renewed? What information do you need?
The process is fairly streamlined. You can get our application from our office. I think you can get it on the internet now too.
You can get it online as well.
You fill out the application, bring it to our office, you pay the fees, and then we start the process. I generally don't see those unless there's some kind of a controversy, or there's an appeal. And then the undersheriff and I actually sit down with the individual and listen to the appeal. But it's a fairly streamlined process. The biggest obstacle, if you will, is the qualification. You have to continue to be qualified, meaning that annually you have to qualify. And you have to bring us a target, and so you have to stay proficient with the firearm. And a lot of people will add a lot of guns. I don't suggest that you do that. Take a couple of weapons, or one that you're proficient with, and put that one on your CCW. Qualify with that one. That way you don't have to qualify with all those other firearms, and frankly, anymore, ammunition is expensive as heck, so it's difficult to keep up with qualification. So pick one gun, be proficient with it, qualify with that one, and then submit your application.
One back here for Mr. Ramsey.
Yes, I'd like to know if the castle law applies to my motorhome.
If you are living in it, if that is your habitation.
It might be tonight.
After the economy goes bad, and that's
no, I guess my point is six months out of the year it's my home,
sure.
But it's not my home tonight.
Yes, it's your residence at that time. That's
At that
the
time.
definition. Yes, sir.
Another question for Mr. Ramsey while you're up. Very nice talk on the use of a firearm in a self-defense situation. I wonder if you could comment on brandishing your weapon in public in an attempt at possibly diffusing a situation. Right. Yeah, what are the legal implications of brandishing your weapon in an attempt at diffusing a situation, or possibly trying to intervene in a situation where perhaps maybe my personal safety or my wife's personal safety is not at risk, but maybe someone else's safety?
If you have a duty of care to that person, if you are trying to defend that person, it just can't be someone's walking along the street, as it were. But in terms of brandishing a weapon, again, it's what is reasonable in that situation. Do you have a fear of great bodily harm or injury to come up with that gun? There is a situation, and we'll get into that gray area, and then we'll get right back to it depends as to whether or not you can brandish that weapon when someone is stealing your car. You can't shoot that person. And that gentleman over here talked about that. But you can say, hey, I've got a gun. That person very well may say, so, and leave. And you're going to have to let that person go, because you cannot shoot that person unless you felt for personal fear.
There are any implications of brandishing, let's say I'm witnessing an assault, a sexual assault.
If you're witnessing a sexual assault upon some other person, yes, you can brandish the weapon and, in fact, take lethal force to stop that particular action if you believe reasonably that that person is being sexually assaulted. It's called an atrocious crime. And an atrocious crime is a substitute for a fear of great bodily injury of yourself or that person.
We have a question back here about citizens' arrest.
Could you speak to the rights of citizens to make arrests? I've done 2 of them, and I'd like to know how broad my powers are.
do that to you. I won't do that to you. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So as citizens, you have actually the right to make an arrest. You have to have probable cause to do it, and in the case of a misdemeanor crime, it has to be occurring in your presence. And if you have probable cause to believe that a misdemeanor crime is occurring in your presence, then you can make a citizen's arrest. And furthermore, you have the legal authority to use a reasonable amount of force to effect that arrest. In the case of a felony, you have to have probable cause to believe that the felony actually occurred, and then the felony actually did have to occur. And if you have that probable cause, you can also make an arrest. And the same holds true with regard to your ability to use reasonable force to effect that arrest. The only thing you can't do as a citizen is serve arrest warrants. Those are reserved for peace officers. And peace officers have certain other legal authority with regard to a misdemeanor arrest committed out of their presence that citizens don't have. But by and large, the arrest powers of the citizen are, in many respects, very similar to the arrest powers of the peace officer. Well, law enforcement has a duty to accept the arrest. However, if the arrest was not based on probable cause, then the law enforcement officer is under no obligation to take that person to jail. Additionally, there are other laws that apply with regard to citing and releasing people in the field for various misdemeanor crimes. Those would still apply. And an officer, if you made a misdemeanor citizen's arrest and the officer cited and released the person in accordance with the law, that would be complying with their particular duties. And Mr. Ramsey suggested that I also talk about the civil implications of making citizens arrests, and there are. If you, as a citizen, make a citizen's arrest and it wasn't based on probable cause, you can be civilly liable. You can be sued for false imprisonment. Okay? Good.
So, if I'm in my house, my family, and I hear noises, the windows broken and the intruder's hanging out of coming in my house, and I shoot him 3 times, probably kill him. Is that legally justified? He hasn't quite got into the house, but he's hanging there.
And I assume he's not hanging from a rope at that time. No, that is called forcibly entering your house. And based upon that there's going to be, and you have a reasonable belief, and under the Castle Doctrine, it is presumed that you have a reasonable belief that that person is going to do you great bodily harm, then the use of lethal force is allowed. But again, there may be exceptions, there may be qualifications, and we get back to it depends, but generally overall.
Can I add something to that? Let me add just one thing to that, because that question begs the next question, which is, if I do that, should I drag him into the house? Right? We've all heard that. We've all heard that. Don't do that. And here's why. If you're involved in a lethal force situation, I would strongly suggest that you not tamper with the scene. Investigators are going to come and process that scene, and they're going to be able to tell that you may have tampered with it, and then your credibility is going to be subject to question. And this is not the time that you want somebody to start disbelieving your story. So I would suggest that you leave things that they are, call us, and then we'll investigate from that point forward.
Let me add one more thing on that issue. And I apologize for being flippant in response to civil liability. Let me just make an overvailing comment. Anybody can sue anyone for anything at any time. It's not necessarily whether you win or lose, it's the cost of the litigation that puts you out of business. So if you use your weapon in any manner, whether it's for the purposes of a citizen's arrest, or you're defending yourself, you're defending another person, you have to believe and you have to count on the fact that you will likely be sued for that act civilly.
I have acreage of wood and cattle and machinery and the fences are around the property and there's no trespassing signs and the gates generally are closed. What are my rights for people that trespass and come onto my property without my permission?
Arrest them.
Would that be a citizen's arrest?
All right, let's answer that question by what a jury would be told. All right, so the right to defend real or personal property. So you're in court. You've done something to defend that property, and the judge would read to the jury, the owner or possessor of real or personal property may use reasonable force to protect that property from imminent harm. The person may also use reasonable force to protect the property of a family member, guest, master, servant, or ward, I love those old terms, from immediate harm. Reasonable force means the amount of force that a reasonable person in the same situation would believe necessary to protect the property from imminent harm. But reasonable force has been decided that you don't generally have the right to protect your personal property. That's what you call a sheriff about. That's what you call the police about. That's what you use your cell phone to take their picture of.
My question is actually to the audience. How many people raise their hands that have CCWs? How many of you carry them right now? And if not, why not?
You know, my wife asked me on the way up here, she said, do you carry a firearm when you go to these things? I said, this is the safest place in America, right? I will guarantee you, and I was telling Scott that earlier, I'll guarantee you there's hardware hanging out here. So, yeah, if you got it, you know, that's like packing an unloaded gun. Why the heck would you pack an unloaded gun? If you've got a weapon, you've got a permit, and you're comfortable doing it, you're not drinking, you're not doing the things that some of us do, carry the dang thing. It doesn't, you know, I gotta tell you, I got one on now. Anybody see it? What side it's on? It's so light, sometimes I forget that I even have it. If you've got one, Kurt, you've done this stuff, you've gone through the class, you're a responsible gun owner, you've already demonstrated proficiency. If you don't have it, you're not going to do me any good. If somebody's shooting back there at me, I expect you guys to take care of business, because you know what? In the SWAT business, retreat is a tactical option. Seriously. If I go out the door and I'm confronting somebody, I'm going to make sure the door is real close, because I might want to go back through that door, shut the door, lock it, perhaps get a firearm to defend myself. But I'm not going to go to a gunfight if I don't have to. And I've seen a lot of big smoke over the years, you can well imagine. And that's not fun. And I'm not going to go to a gunfight. And the guy with the knife, he's a crazy guy anyway. I don't want to get within 21 feet of him. And if you've ever seen a knife fight, you can close 21 feet in very, very short order, quicker than you can draw and fire your weapon if somebody's within 21 feet. That's for me, this gentleman here. If he's bent on using a knife, and if he knows how to use it, he can close that distance quicker than I can draw and fire my gun. Get on the internet, there's a ton of stuff out there that shows you actual confrontations with a knife-wielding individual. But yeah, if you got it, you know, I might need it, so I appreciate it if you carry it.
If an unconstitutional law is passed by the state to collect all guns, how would that be handled in Butte County?
Well, first of all, the constitutionality of any law is not determined by a sheriff with a gold badge. It's determined by, that's determined by the court. Your law enforcement folks do not determine that. So in terms of being unconstitutional, how do we know it's unconstitutional? Has the court ruled upon that yet? I mean, there's a process that has to occur there. But your sheriff doesn't determine constitutionality of the law.
Yeah, a few years ago, the Lieutenant Governor, when he was still mayor of San Francisco, he was noted for making San Francisco a sanctuary city for illegal aliens. And I remember one situation where the illegal alien he was a criminal. He was a pedophile or something, a drug dealer, I don't know, something fairly serious. And they just refused to deport him, do anything else about it. They just wouldn't prosecute the guy. And I'm just wondering, is it possible for you three gentlemen to turn Butte County into a sanctuary city or sanctuary county for people with assault rifles and large capacity magazines?
This gentleman has had his hand up for the last 20 minutes. I was waiting for that question.
Well, here's something that just to consider is that the Department of Justice in California, when you go to a gun show in Reno, they'll go through that parking lot at the Grand Pavilion, whatever that place is called. They go through, they get all the California license plates, they put them all in order there, and then when you come through that inspection at Lake Tahoe, they will stop you and search your vehicle for contraband, and they've done it a number of times and arrested people for buying magazines and what have you because they go to Reno. But they'll go to a illegal alien convention, and you can have 1,000 of them out there, half of them criminals probably, and they won't do nothing. So they're going to go after you, a law-abiding citizen, just to go and get something like that. And so my question for you, are you going to prosecute something like that?
That's something like that.
Well, let's just say that you catch somebody with a high-capacity magazine.
Correct.
Down to the shooting range, okay?
Understand, and it's a common misconception, that a high-capacity magazine, the mere possession of a high-capacity magazine is illegal. It isn't.
I understand. Okay, I understand. So the law wasn't passed, and let's just say if that law was passed, okay, and it wasn't anything else, just the possession,
the mere possession
of a large capacity magazine of over 10 rounds, okay?
Correct.
Now you go down to the Oroville shooting range where people out there have 20 rounds and 30 round magazines, okay? And you know, out the range, you've had them for a long time. Is that something you're going to prosecute, or you're going to say, we're not going to do that, we're going to make this a sanctuary county for that? Seriously, I'm asking that.
No, what you're asking is the situation, just as the sheriff has already spoken to. We are sworn to uphold all of the laws of the state of California. If that is the law of the state of California, we would be breaking our oath if we're not upholding that law. If the court makes a decision that that's illegal, then it is a law that we have to enforce. Do we like it? Do we make a recommendation to the judge that this person is not a gangbanger, this person is a person that has otherwise responsible use of a weapon? Is this person deserving of something that would be the same as a gangbanger or an illegal alien or anyone else that is not as responsible? No. I mean, that would be a judge's decision as to the sentencing. It would be our decision as to what to recommend.
But you can, as a district attorney, you can't choose to prosecute or not to prosecute.
That is correct.
Okay, so then you can just say
what happens.
Well, then you just don't prosecute. You say we're not going to. Just like
I'm saying what you're saying. No, if we refuse to prosecute a case that is a legal case, then the Attorney General of the state of California can come in and prosecute that case.
Okay, but I guess what I'm saying is maybe the sheriff will instruct his deputies to do not write up these situations.
The sheriff would probably not do that because of his oath also.
Okay, yeah, but what stops in San Francisco from them doing it? Because there was a law also there, and they just chose not to enforce the law because they're Democrats and say the end justifies the means.
Understand that the federal government is in charge of what is an undocumented alien. Local law enforcement does not arrest, and has no powers of arrest on undocumented, the true and correct and legal term. Most folks call it illegal alien, and that's up to the federal government. It's up to the federal government there in San Francisco, the U.S. Attorney's Northern District, San Francisco, whether they, through the FBI, through the DEA, ATF, would come in and take action.
So what was the recent legislation where Jerry Brown, the big thing is we're not going to wait for the federal, we're going to make California a sanctuary state. What was that about then?
No, and the sheriff can speak a little better to that. That is about not making it a sanctuary state, but whether or not you can hold someone past the 3 days that you're waiting for the ICE to come and pick that person up.
Well,
that's all that is about.
I would just, again, it comes down to, it seems that they pick and choose which laws they're going to enforce and which laws they're not going to enforce. And it seems to be maybe that even the district attorney says, well, I'm not going to go after that. I'm just not going to. Orange County one time, I got burned on a construction, okay?
Okay, I think some folks want other questions here.
One over on your left here.
I'd like to ask, there seems to be a lot more road rage type incidents. And for example, the one in New York, where the bikers, broke the windows. If you do feel that immediate threat, are you allowed to take legal action? If you're in your vehicle, somebody pulls up next to you and starts to attack.
Reasonably believe that your life is in danger or that you're about to suffer great bodily injury, and the law says that you can use lethal force to defend yourself. Reasonably believe that.
We got more stuff going on here tonight. So we got one more over here, and let's kind of cut it off. You'll be able to mingle at the end of this thing with these folks.
Actually, I don't have a question for you. Outstanding presentation, but I think there was one point that was missed. And that's to have those that choose to have a concealed carry firearm is the moral ramifications. They have to really look into themselves if they're willing to take a human life, because that's the most serious decision that you'll probably ever make. And kind of use that as somewhat of the parameters. If you're willing to pull a gun, if you're willing to fire it, you're willing to take a human life. Is it that serious?
Thank you, former Chief Walters, and as he knows, and that perfect segue into something I wanted to kind of end this with. For about the last, well, been in the DA's office now 36 years. For about the last 34 of those years, I have been doing officer-involved shootings, making decisions on officer-involved shootings. Each time an officer, unfortunately, has to take the life of someone else in the course of their duty. I have been, even before I was district attorney, looking at those cases and making a decision, was it justified for that officer to take that person's life? And we can talk all day about the legality or the reasonableness, but when you come down to the final level, as Paul's just indicated, about taking another human life, and where I have made a pronouncement in a number of cases and told the officers, you were justified in what you did. Now, that may take a burden off of the officer about whether he's going to be sued or not, but it does not take that burden and that huge moral burden upon that officer when they realize, after the adrenaline has gone down, trying to protect their own life, and in the days and weeks that follow, that they realize they have taken a fellow human's life. And my very first officer-involved shooting, I did it just kind of by the book. Okay, here's what you did, and so on and so forth. Justified. Okay, thank you very much. We're done. But that officer, fine officer, Orville Police Department officer, Took it, was fine that night. But it haunted him. And it haunted him for the remainder of a shortened life. 5 years later, that officer drove his car in front of a train because of the stress that that one act that night did. So ever since then, I make sure that when I'm talking to officers, I say, no macho, no legal. You have taken a person's life, and you have to process that. You have to go to the department psychologist. You have to go through this, because you are a fine officer, and we don't want to lose you. Nonetheless, there have been officers that after taking a person's life, luckily we've got some very fine psychologists, but they've decided, I don't want to be in law enforcement anymore because of what I had to do. And that's something, just as Paul's indicated, you have to be ready for, you think you may